No, actually, I was younger. I was 23 when I met him.
Is that right? 23 when
Yes,
you met him? 28 when you married him, 23 when you met him?
Yes.
Yeah.
He was older than my father, but that wasn't the big deal.
Cary Grant was the ultimate Hollywood leading man, charming, sophisticated, and admired around the world. But behind the polished image was a life full of secrets. For years, rumors followed him, yet nothing was ever confirmed. That changed when a private letter surfaced, one that exposed the truth about the double life Cary Grant had carefully hidden from the public eye. The man the world came to know as Cary Grant was a phantom, a magnificent illusion conjured from the ashes of a painful past. He was the epitome of suave sophistication, the very definition of a Hollywood leading man. His chiseled good looks, his athletic grace, and that distinctive, unplaceable mid-Atlantic accent made him an icon of charm and wit. On screen, he was the man every woman desired and every man wanted to be. He moved through frothy screwball comedies and heart-pounding thrillers with an effortless elegance, a twinkle in his eye that suggested he was always in on the joke. But behind that carefully constructed facade, behind the perfectly tailored suits and the dazzling smile, lived another man, a man named Archibald Leach. And Archie's story was anything but a fairy tale. It was a life of profound trauma, of hidden relationships, of a desperate search for identity that led him down some very unexpected paths. There wasn't one single dramatic letter that tore away the mask of Cary Grant in an instant. Instead, it was a slow, steady accumulation of whispers, of stories told by those who knew him best, of his own candid admissions in the later years of his life. It was a collection of letters, both literal and figurative, that, when pieced together, revealed the complex and often heartbreaking reality of the man behind the myth. Archie Leach, the boy from Bristol, was slowly transforming into someone else entirely, but not without cost. His relationship with Ori Kelly, if we believe Kelly's own words, was filled with affection, jealousy, dreams, and betrayal. They were both young, both ambitious, and both trying to survive in a world that had little patience for failure or difference. Their bond was forged not only out of love, but out of necessity. New York in the 1920s was exhilarating but brutal, especially for outsiders like them. They found comfort in each other during those lean years, sharing cheap apartments and living hand to mouth. Archie worked wherever he could find employment, sometimes as an extra in stage plays, sometimes even as a soda jerk or doorman. According to Kelly, they spent their evenings weaving elaborate fantasies about the lives they wished to lead. Archie dreamed of wealth, respectability, and fame, though his early life had taught him how elusive those things could be. As time passed, Archie's ambitions grew larger, and so did the chasm between him and Ori Kelly. The deeper Archie waded into the world of American entertainment, the more conscious he became of how fragile success was and how much image mattered. In an era when rumors about sexual orientation could end a career overnight, Archie realized he had to craft a version of himself that America would embrace. This meant leaving certain people and parts of himself behind. His relationship with Ori Kelly faded, not in an explosive breakup, but in a gradual, painful distancing. The man who would become Cary Grant began to bury Archie Leach's past, piece by piece, like someone sweeping dust under a rug, never imagining it would one day be uncovered. By the early 1930s, Archie Leach had made his way to Hollywood. He signed with Paramount Pictures, who insisted he change his name. The studio brass decided Archie Leach sounded too ordinary, too English, too bland. And so, after considering various options, Cary Grant was born, a name that would soon come to symbolize charm, elegance, and effortless cool. But behind the suave exterior, the wounds of his past remained unresolved. The name change wasn't just a marketing decision. It was a psychological rebirth. Archie Leach, the lonely boy from Bristol, was effectively killed off in favor of this new, polished identity. Cary Grant was everything Archie wasn't. Confident, poised, in control. Yet no matter how many bow ties he wore or how many leading ladies he kissed on screen, Archie's ghosts refused to disappear. His early years in Hollywood were not immediately filled with success. Grant started out in smaller roles, often cast as the second lead or comic relief. But it didn't take long for audiences to notice something special about him. He had an innate sense of timing, a sly wit, and a physical grace that set him apart from his peers. Directors noticed it too. Soon, he was cast opposite some of the biggest female stars of the era. Mae West in She Done Him Wrong and I'm No Angel, Katharine Hepburn in Bringing Up Baby, and Irene Dunne in The Awful Truth. Each role added another layer to the Cary Grant persona, a mix of debonair sophistication and light-hearted charm. But for all his professional success, Grant's personal life remained complicated. His relationship with women was always tinged with the unresolved trauma of his mother's disappearance and his father's betrayal. Trust did not come easily. He married 5 times, yet each marriage ended in divorce. His first marriage to Virginia Cherrill, the actress best known for playing the blind flower girl in Charlie Chaplin's City Lights, was tumultuous and brief. They fought often, and Grant's insecurities, rooted in childhood abandonment, played out in jealousy and suspicion. His subsequent marriages to Barbara Hutton, one of the richest women in the world, and actress Betsy Drake, who introduced him to psychotherapy and the controversial practice of LSD therapy, followed similar patterns of hope, friction, and ultimate failure.
But he could play the perfect romantic partner on screen, but struggled to maintain intimacy off it. Despite his polished exterior, Grant privately battled anxiety and self-doubt. He began experimenting with LSD in the late 1950s, not recreationally, but under the guidance of a therapist. In an era when LSD was still legal and considered a therapeutic tool, Grant underwent more than 100 guided sessions. He later credited the experience with helping him come to terms with his troubled childhood, particularly his mother's institutionalization. LSD allowed him to confront long-suppressed emotions, peeling back the layers of his carefully constructed persona. He spoke candidly about it in interviews later in life, calling the sessions life-changing. It was through this therapy that he finally learned the truth about his mother. In his late 30s, Cary Grant discovered that Elsie Leach was not dead, as his father had told him. She was alive, institutionalized in Bristol for over 2 decades. When he finally reunited with her, it was not a joyful homecoming but a painful reckoning. The woman he found was frail and mentally fragile, her life having been wasted away behind asylum walls. Grant supported her financially for the rest of her life, but their relationship was haunted by the lost years. He carried this guilt silently, rarely speaking about it publicly. The scars from this revelation ran deep, influencing his relationships and feeding his perfectionist tendencies. Meanwhile, Grant's career reached heights few actors ever achieve. He starred in some of the most iconic films of Hollywood's golden age, including Alfred Hitchcock's Notorious, To Catch a Thief, and North by Northwest. His collaborations with Hitchcock were particularly significant. Hitchcock understood Grant's duality better than most directors. He used Grant's charm to mask the darker undercurrents of his characters, allowing audiences to see both the suave exterior and the vulnerability underneath. Hitchcock once said of Grant, "There's no actor who can make you like him while you suspect he might be the villain." This ambiguity was part of Grant's magic. As he aged, Cary Grant made a conscious decision to retire from acting while still at the top of his game. Unlike many of his contemporaries, he didn't wait for the roles to dry up. His final film was Walk, Don't Run in 1966. After that, he stepped away from the screen, focusing on his business ventures and his role as a father. His daughter, Jennifer Grant, born when he was in his 60s, became the great love of his later life. By all accounts, he was a devoted father, determined to give her the stability and affection he had never known as a child.
Yet even in retirement, the question of Cary Grant's sexuality continued to follow him. Rumors persisted about his early life with Ori Kelly and other possible relationships with men, including fellow actor Randolph Scott. Grant and Scott lived together for more than a decade, sharing a beach house in Santa Monica. The press of the time referred to them as the bachelors, often publishing staged photographs of them cooking or sunbathing together. Whether this was a close friendship, a romantic relationship, or something more complicated remains a subject of debate to this day. Some argue that the studio system encouraged these living arrangements as a form of public relations, a way to keep certain rumors at bay while simultaneously presenting a palatable image of male companionship. Others believe the relationship was genuine and intimate, concealed behind Hollywood's rigid expectations. Cary Grant himself refused to comment directly on these rumors. In interviews, he would deflect or joke about it, never giving a definitive answer. His public image remained meticulously crafted until the end. In his autobiography drafts and interviews, he preferred to focus on his career, his philosophy of life, and his role as a father. The painful details of his early life, the mother in the asylum, the father's lies, the struggles of his early years in New York, were topics he often skirted around or addressed only obliquely. When Cary Grant died in 1986 at the age of 82, he left behind a legacy that is still debated and dissected. He is remembered as one of the greatest screen icons of all time, a symbol of classic Hollywood sophistication. But beneath the tuxedo, the impeccable hair, and the clipped mid-Atlantic accent was Archie Leach, the boy from Bristol, forever grappling with abandonment, reinvention, and the complicated business of being human. His life was a testament to both the power and the cost of self-transformation. He didn't just play roles on the screen. He lived a role off it, crafting a persona so convincing that, for decades, the world never questioned it. Yet the truth, as it so often does, has a way of resurfacing. Letters like Ori Kelly's memoir, late-in-life interviews, and retrospective biographies have gradually painted a fuller picture of the man behind the legend. Cary Grant wasn't just the charming gentleman who chased blondes across movie screens. He was also a man who carried the burden of early trauma, who struggled with identity, and who sought solace in therapy and reinvention. His story is more than Hollywood glamour. It is a tale of survival, resilience, and the complex, often painful process of becoming who we are. By the early 1930s, Archie Leach had made his way to Hollywood. He signed a contract with Paramount Pictures, and it was the studio that insisted on a name change. Archie Leach was deemed too common, too working class, and so Cary Grant was born. The transformation was swift and total. The rough edges of the boy from Bristol were smoothed away, replaced by an air of effortless sophistication. The studio meticulously crafted his public persona, that of a dashing, debonair man about town. But even as Cary Grant, the matinee idol, was being introduced to the world, echoes of Archie Leach's past and his unconventional private life continued to reverberate. It was on the set of the 1932 film Hot Saturday that he met Randolph Scott, a ruggedly handsome actor who would become the other great love of his life. The relationship between Cary Grant and Randolph Scott is one of the most enduring and debated in Hollywood history. For 12 years, on and off, they lived together in a beachfront home in Malibu that the press playfully nicknamed Bachelor Hall. Their cohabitation was an open secret in Hollywood, a town that, even then, was adept at looking the other way when it came to the private lives of its biggest stars. The studio, ever protective of its investment, went into overdrive to manage the public perception of their relationship. They arranged for a series of publicity photos to be taken, images that were meant to portray Grant and Scott as two red-blooded American bachelors enjoying a life of sun, sand, and an endless stream of beautiful women. But the photos, in their attempt to normalize the situation, had the opposite effect. They captured an intimacy, a domesticity, that was impossible to ignore. There they were, Grant and Scott, laughing together by the pool, cooking breakfast in their matching aprons, exercising in their high-waisted shorts. The homoerotic subtext was palpable, and the rumors began to fly. Gossip columnists, like the powerful Hedda Hopper and Luella Parsons, walked a fine line. They would hint at the unusual living arrangement, using coded language that their readers would understand, but they never dared to state the truth outright. The letter of their columns was one of insinuation, of carefully planted seeds of doubt. The studios, meanwhile, continued their campaign of damage control. They arranged for Grant and Scott to be seen in public with a rotating cast of starlets, creating the illusion of a vibrant and conventional romantic life. Grant would marry 5 times, each marriage a carefully orchestrated performance for the public. His first wife, the actress Virginia Cherrill, would later complain that her husband was more interested in spending time with Randolph Scott than with her. Their marriage was short-lived, and after the divorce, Grant moved right back in with Scott. This pattern would repeat itself throughout Grant's life. And after Scott married, the two men remained intensely close. Decades later, long after both men had retired from the screen, they were occasionally spotted together, two old friends whose bond had weathered the storms of Hollywood and the constraints of a less tolerant time. Hollywood in the 1930s and 1940s was a place of illusion, and no illusion was more carefully maintained than that of the heterosexual leading man. The studio system had a vested interest in ensuring that its most bankable stars fit into a particular mold. Men like Cary Grant were supposed to be suave, charming, and above all, desirable to women. Any hint that Grant's personal life deviated from that image posed a direct threat to the box office. As a result, publicists and studio heads worked overtime to construct and defend the narrative. They staged photo opportunities with actresses, fed stories to the press, and threatened reporters who got too close to uncomfortable truths. Grant and Scott's living arrangement was the worst-kept secret in Hollywood, whispered about at cocktail parties and on studio lots, but rarely spoken of openly. The press would refer to their shared beach house in Santa Monica as Bachelor Hall, a seemingly innocent term that masked a more complex reality. Friends of the pair often remarked on how content and at ease they seemed when together, far more relaxed than when they were forced into the spotlight with their public dates. Scott, known for his stoic demeanor and southern charm, was a steadying presence in Grant's often turbulent life. Grant, on the other hand, was more anxious and self-conscious, always aware of how precarious his carefully crafted public image was. Behind closed doors, away from the cameras and the columnists, they built a life that defied the conventions of their era. They collected art, decorated their home with impeccable taste, and entertained close friends who understood the delicate balance they had to maintain. Even as Grant cycled through his series of marriages, Virginia Cherrill, Barbara Hutton, Betsy Drake, Diane Cannon, and Barbara Harris, his relationship with Scott remained a constant. Each new marriage brought with it the same pattern: a whirlwind courtship, a highly publicized wedding, and eventual disillusionment. Behind the scenes, it was Scott who provided the steady companionship that Grant seemed unable to find in his wives. Some biographers have suggested that Grant's marriages were less about seeking love and more about seeking protection. Protection from rumors, from scandal, and from the ruthless gossip machine that chewed up and spit out stars who strayed too far from the expected script. The fear of exposure was not without reason. In that era, being publicly outed as gay or bisexual could mean career suicide. Stars like William Haynes, a popular leading man of the silent era, saw their careers destroyed after refusing to hide their true selves. Grant, whose entire livelihood depended on the illusion of heterosexual charm, could not afford to take that risk. So he played the game, mastering the art of deflection, of charming interviews and witty comebacks that kept prying questions at bay. Yet, despite the pressure and the secrecy, Grant and Scott managed to hold on to a private corner of their lives, a space where they could simply be themselves. Their enduring friendship, or partnership, as some speculate, outlasted the Hollywood studio system itself. When the era of gossip columns faded and the golden age of Hollywood came to an end, they remained linked, a pair of aging stars who had weathered the industry's most ruthless years together. The exact nature of their relationship may never be fully known, but their loyalty to each other speaks volumes. In later interviews, Grant would refer to Scott as one of the most important people in his life, carefully choosing words that were affectionate but never revealing too much. For Scott, who was less inclined to talk to the press, actions spoke louder than words. He was there, consistently, through Grant's highest highs and lowest lows. When Grant died in 1986, Scott was reportedly devastated. He passed away just a few months later in 1987, as if the thread that had bound them together for over half a century had finally snapped. Their story remains one of Hollywood's most whispered-about relationships, a quiet testament to love, friendship, and resilience in an era that demanded secrecy. Even now, long after their deaths, the photos of them lounging together at the beach, laughing over dinner, or sitting side by side in comfortable silence tell a story more honest than any headline ever could. The question of Cary Grant's sexuality remains a complex and sensitive one. Some biographers have stated definitively that he was gay, others that he was bisexual. His daughter, Jennifer Grant, born from his fourth marriage to actress Diane Cannon, has always maintained that her father was straight. Grant himself, a master of evasion and ambiguity, never gave a straight answer. When a reporter once famously asked him, "Who is Cary Grant?" he replied with his trademark wit, "When you find out, tell me." But in a rare moment of candor, in a conversation with the writer Bill Royce, Grant seemed to offer a glimpse into his own understanding of his sexuality. He spoke of it as a journey, a spectrum of experience. He implied that he had been primarily gay as a young man, then bisexual, and in his later years, straight. He saw sexuality not as a fixed identity, but as a performance, a role to be played. To not explore the full range of one's desires, he suggested, would be like an actor playing only one character for his entire life. This conversation, another letter from the hidden life of Cary Grant, suggests a man who was far more modern, far more fluid in his thinking than the rigid constraints of his era would have allowed him to be in public. By the late 1950s, the carefully constructed world of Cary Grant was beginning to show its cracks. Despite his immense success, he was a deeply unhappy man. The ghosts of his past, the abandonment he had felt as a child, the constant pressure of maintaining his public image had taken their toll. He was in his 50s, at the height of his fame, and yet he felt a profound emptiness, a sense of being an imposter in his own life. It was at this point that another, and perhaps the most surprising, chapter of his story began. A chapter that would involve a controversial new form of therapy and a powerful psychedelic drug. It was his third wife, the actress Betsy Drake, who first introduced him to the world of psychoanalysis, and eventually to lysergic acid diethylamide, or LSD. At the time, LSD was a legal, if highly experimental, therapeutic tool. A number of psychiatrists in California were using it to help their patients break through psychological barriers and access repressed memories. Grant, desperate for a solution to his inner turmoil, was intrigued. He began a series of supervised LSD sessions with Dr. Mortimer Hartman, a respected Beverly Hills psychiatrist. Over the next few years, he would take the drug an estimated 100 times. The experience, he would later say, was nothing short of revelatory. It was under the influence of LSD that Cary Grant was finally able to confront the man he had been running from his entire life, Archie Leach. He described his sessions as a journey through a mosaic of past impressions, a series of horrifying and happy sights. He revisited his childhood in Bristol, the pain of his mother's disappearance, the coldness of his father. He saw with a newfound clarity how these early traumas had shaped his adult life, particularly his relationships with women. He came to believe that he had been punishing his wives for the perceived sins of his mother, recreating the pattern of abandonment over and over again. The LSD therapy was a brutal but ultimately liberating experience. It was, he said, like being reborn. It allowed him to strip away the layers of defense, the hypocrisy and vanity that had defined the character of Cary Grant. He was able to forgive his parents, to understand that they had done the best they could with the knowledge and resources they had. And most importantly, it allowed him to finally make peace with himself. He became an unlikely evangelist for LSD, speaking openly and enthusiastically about its therapeutic benefits in interviews. He called it a wonder drug and credited it with bringing him a sense of peace and happiness that had eluded him for his entire life. This public advocacy, this letter, written in the pages of magazines and spoken on television, was a radical act for a star of his stature. It was a stunning departure from the carefully controlled narrative that the studios had spent decades building around him. It was, in many ways, the moment that the phantom of Cary Grant began to dissolve, revealing the flawed, fragile, and ultimately more human figure of Archie Leach. It was during this period of intense self-exploration that Grant received the most shocking news of his life. In 1935, his father Elias lay on his deathbed. He confessed to his son that Elsie, the mother Cary had believed to be dead for over 2 decades,
was in fact alive. She was still a patient in the mental institution where he had left her all those years ago. The revelation was a bombshell. At the age of 31, Cary Grant, the world-famous movie star, discovered that his entire life had been built on a lie. He immediately arranged to have his mother released from the asylum. He bought her a house in Bristol and provided for her care for the rest of her life. He would fly to England to visit her regularly, but their relationship was, understandably, a difficult one. How do you reconnect with a mother who has been, for all intents and purposes, a ghost for your entire life? How do you forgive a father who has perpetrated such a cruel deception? The story of his mother's institutionalization and his eventual reunion with her is perhaps the most poignant letter in the secret history of Cary Grant. It is a story of profound loss, of betrayal, and of a love that was stolen and could never be fully reclaimed. In 1966, at the age of 62, Cary Grant did something almost unheard of for a star of his magnitude. He retired from acting. He had just become a father for the first time, to his daughter Jennifer, and he was determined to give her the childhood he had never had. He turned his back on Hollywood, on the adulation of millions, and dedicated himself to being a full-time father. It was a role he cherished, and by all accounts, he excelled at it. He was a doting and devoted parent, a man who had finally found a sense of purpose and belonging that had eluded him for so long. In the years that followed, he continued to be a savvy businessman, serving on the boards of several companies, including the cosmetics firm Fabergé. He was a man who had at last integrated the two halves of his life. He was no longer just the phantom, Cary Grant, nor was he the wounded boy, Archie Leach. He was, simply, himself. The story of Cary Grant is a story of transformation, of a man who invented himself, not once, but many times over. He was a master of illusion, both on and off the screen. But the true story, the one that has emerged in the letters left behind by those who knew him, and in his own brave admissions, is far more compelling than any role he ever played. It is a story about the enduring power of childhood trauma, about the courage it takes to confront one's demons, and about the quiet dignity of a man who spent his entire life searching for the love and acceptance he was denied as a child. The world fell in love with Cary Grant, the polished and perfect leading man, but it is in the hidden life of Archie Leach, with all its pain and its complexity, that we find the true measure of the man. The letter of his life, when read in its entirety, is not a scandalous exposé, but a deeply human story, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, and a reminder that even the brightest stars have their shadows. It is a story that continues to fascinate, to move, and to inspire, long after the final credits have rolled. It is the story of a man who, against all odds, found his way home to himself, and in doing so, he left behind a legacy that is far richer and far more meaningful than any of his iconic performances. He was, in the end, a man who learned to love the boy he had once been. And in that act of self-acceptance, he became more than a star. He became a man who, for all his carefully constructed artifice, was, in the end, profoundly and beautifully real. The letter revealed what many had only whispered about, forcing fans to see a different side of Cary Grant. His story is a reminder that even the most glamorous lives often have hidden layers, chapters we don't see until the spotlight fades and the private pages come to light.